Okay, thank you. As I said yesterday, this conference is a good opportunity for us here in Institute to, even with no native English speakers present, to attempt to jointly try to thematize this concept of engagement, and to harmonize and confront it with the word commitment. This is just preamble, we can say, of the text, what is act of engagement, because I try to make something. Thesis is that without act of engagement, there is no institution. That means they are participating in construction of institution, and there's many differences between engagement acts or engaged acts and social, collegial, and institutional protocols. And I'm using different examples in this text. Guala, Betzler, who wrote about collegiality, Schmid, Reiner and Husserl, nicht soziale Akte, etc., etc. That will not be here. I will just propose some differences in front of commitment. I will use different solutions of Gilbert. First of all, when I said, okay, I think there is no magic with this act description, act of engagement or engaged. I didn't invented this engaged toilet. Toilet in Churchill movie, you see this if you saw the film. Today in England, it's difficult to find on toilet engaged. You have occupy, but well, engaged is better than occupy, because in occupy you have some kind of copare, and there's something to say, it's something violent. In engaged, as in joint engagement, you can, if you put in Google joint engagement, you will see that you have two kind of possibilities. You can find joint engagement in royal family. Royal family uses joint engagement, and in how to say, autism. That could be careful use of language. In autism, in difference from joint engagement is very good. It's not possible now to analyze this process in which an infant or children learns to involve themselves with the same object or event as another person. This is beautiful, as another person. That could be joint engagement. But when I said engaged, when the toilet is engaged, it doesn't mean that there is behind some engagement act. I think that nothing is behind the door of toilet. There is no engagement act, because this is engaged is space. Space is engaged because space is temporary engaged, and act is engagement acts could be connected with the invention of public space, which toilet represents. Anyway, when I would like to describe very fast a special kind of social acts, and attempt to determine the function they have in relation between various agents, and most importantly define their significance in transformation of a group or social group into an institution, or, if you want, higher order entity. This is remake of one Husserl's term, Husserl's syntagma. My premise is that there are acts whose aim is to engage others, or all others, since they refer to all of us as together, and in so doing reduce negative social acts as well, because if negative social acts, if they are acts, as well as various asocial behaviors within a group or institution. In this sense, engaged acts could alternatively also belong to a kind of institutional act, since they introduce certain adjustments to the institution, changing or modifying its rules, increasing its consistency and efficiency. Well, principle, how to find a place for this word beside the word commitment. I think that engagement is not synonymous with commitment, even though the two words are used in translation between English, French and German. Commitment is now often not translated at all into European languages. For example, Becker text or Margaret Gilbert's commitment are translated in French as engagement, while in the opposite direction, Sartre's or Adorno's engagement is translated into American or English as commitment. But I remember that one review, your net journal in German, that you wrote one small text about commitment. Commitment is not translated in German, it exists without translation. Anyway, joint commitment is translation into French in Margaret Gilbert's book as engagement conjoint, and not as, for example, co-engagement, which would be much more, I think, better. Anyway, that word, it's very interesting when Earl of Shaftesbury says in 1711 who Hercules was. This is the book, A Notion of the Tablature or Judgment of Hercules. He said, quote, he admires, he contemplates, but is not yet engaged or interested. And in one English-German dictionary in 1763, the word engagement is translated very good as verbinden or einreizen. Well, engagement, however, is also not some supplementary phenomenon or a technical term that the phrase social acts already includes in itself, or that the concepts of commitment or joint commitment somehow necessarily imply. There are a small list, a few basic characteristics of this specific protocol in relation to others, such as the social, collegial, and committed acts. First, or A, both engagement and commitment refer to the will. Commitment of the will. This is Gilbert's in the text from 2013 in an International Encyclopedia of Ethics. But engagement explicitly assumes the transfer or import of certain burden or amount of burden that can then be compared to other similar engaged acts. Engagement is never the same or at some other engagement, and the quantity of the burden or gauge or pledge always determines its efficiency and success, as well as strength of bond to some future actions that the engagement could initiate. That's why einreizen. This quantitative characteristic, example, amount of enthusiasm and will to perform some task or introduce or change a rule, has resulted in the verb to engage becoming the condition for an action or simply preceding some following action. You can find in Raimo, for example, when Raimo uses engagement in social ontology, I quote, the engagement of the agent is already needed before acting. look at this, the engagement of the agent is already needed before acting. That means he engages something before. Or the other from Johnson, commitment and conceptual structure and empirical application, I quote, they had indeed engaged in some acts. If person A is engaged to be a manager of a company or to conduct certain business acts and make decisions, then the same person A could be very engaged at their new job. They would, in that case, produce many, rather than few, various acts, which could be described as engaged and be called acts of engagement. Engagement of person A at their new job could then incite other agents or co-workers to also engage and follow the engagement of person A in their own activities. In that sense, person A would not produce acts that engage no one. In French, this is very good, because we are between the languages, and we have, all of us, we have a problem with this. The French equivalent of this would be n'engage à rien, qui non engage à rien. That is to say, acts that leave others indifferent. Yet, we could not say that these acts necessarily bind all other agents to follow the enthusiasm of person A. The act of engagement would therefore be one to which another act is joined, which it follows without obligation and coercion. Which it follows without obligation and coercion. That's the difference between joint commitment. There is no obligation and coercion. If I do this, if I collect all this bottle of waters and give you this, that is not oblige you to do the same thing, but you have some kind of pledge, some kind of gauge. You are not quiet after this my action. B, there is 3. B, if okay, that could be just in Austin. You can find in the book, in his book, commissions. You can find chapter about the protocols he mentioned. Engage and pledge are some of them that are not binding, such as promise, yet could still, I quote Austin, commit you to doing something, but include also declarations or announcement of intentions. A statement that commits the speaker to some future action simultaneously performs 2 functions. On the one hand, it prevents omissions and negative acts, and on the other, engages the audience who are supposed to respond to the speaker in one way or another. You can find, this is 152 page, 156, 58. Okay, if the term engagement describes several or more acts of engagement, then these acts should be frequent and directed at the same goal. This is best definition of commitment. I quote, consistent line of activity. Commitment is consistent line of activity, and you can find in 2 main texts. Gilbert is just a remake this Becker and Johnson text about commitment, where commitment, Johnson, okay, differentiates personal and behavior commitment, you know, personal and joint commitment in Gilbert. But anyway, what is commitment? Commitment is consistent line of activity. Both engagement and commitment share this characteristic because both protocols allow acts to issue and follow one another. Person A engaged or committed to the new position of management, for example, produces acts that we can describe as strongly dedicated to the goal or task before them. It would appear as if person A no longer has a choice, I quote, and must continue the line of action whether he or she is personally committed to it or not. If, after a period of time, the commitment of a person A is relegated because the promises, agreements, contracts, or duty of person A surpass their personal preferences and enthusiasm, I quote, she must continue the line of action, I assume that the characteristic of engagement of person A, on the contrary, still surpasses the obligation they have accepted and task to which they have agreed. That means that's the difference between commitment. Commitment can stop when you finish with your obligation. You stop. In engagement is not necessarily. And C, commitment and engagement could be separated in the following manner. As a matter of fact, person A has been committed by the board or some committee to perform the job of the manager, much as person A has the capacity or authorization to commit or delegate various co-workers in the job at hand. That means that the different meaning, committed and commit or delegate various co-workers in the job at hand. You can find this in Margaret Gilbert's new book. But in the word commitment, you have this possibility. Thus, person A has been committed to do something, and in turn, this person has the, I quote Gilbert, right to demand of someone a certain action, to give command and thus obligate others. In Gilbert, this book is published in June, it is commitment and not joint commitment in its medieval uses that explicitly assumes of someone to do something. That means in the word commitment you have you have command that I am committed as a director, but I have possibility to demand of someone a certain action, and this is commitment. For Margaret Gilbert, however, joint commitment is ground of right to demand of one to do something, or I quote, a right against another person has the standing to demand a particular action from that person. Well, in that sense, commitment is chain operation that puts together multiple actors. Committere, this is zusammentun or zusammensetzen, then in several ways. Well, that means operation that puts together multiple actors in several ways. First, by each individually, through an act, places themselves under an obligation, by one who has a mandate to obligate others by command, fulfilling in that way an obligation given to them or ordered by someone else. Person A could be committed to performing an act, or person A could commit person B to performing an act, but also person A could engage such that their actions are not at all obligating and are not in accordance with commitment. That's my point. For example, person A attempts to improve the system as they found in the new company, and thus begins a quality of improvement project that is outside their task description. This action has resonated and intrigued person B, and they have decided to join. This is without any obligation. irregardless that with the person B's act of joining person A has certainly created a certain normative order, this is not a problematic, and an obligation between them after that. Joining is also the condition for the joint action that Gilbert names as a joint commitment. I nevertheless insist that this pseudo-obligation is purely temporary and can always be broken by either side. And this is completely in, how to say, complementary, in harmony with the meaning of the word engagement in English, or connected to the marriage, or engagement de mariage. That means there is that's why I call it engagement and not joint commitment, because I can broke my agreement, engagement without consult my partner. Gilbert's interventions over the years have rendered the phrase joint commitment rather vague. It seems to me that the reconstruction and introduction of the term engagement, along with the related terms such as act of engagement, could in one way or another correct and pin down the meaning of joint commitment. Joint commitment would first of all be a semi-pleonasm, as it only emphasizes one of the meaning commitment already carries within itself. Nearly 20 years ago, Gilbert introduces the phrase, I quote, relevant joint commitment. Relevant joint commitment. That implies successful joint commitment if the actors paradoxically are more engaged, or if they act in a specific way. I quote Gilbert now, people who can engage in joint activity. That's how she's using the term. People who can engage in joint activity, or, I quote, acting together as a stemming from a prior agreement to engage in the relevant joint action. Or again, I quote, only if a certain condition is satisfied will he or Lily be committed through the relevant joint commitment. Which kind of certain condition? Engage is there. Engagement is that certain condition hides engagement. The problems only multiply in her book Rights and Demands. In the chapter, for example, the ubiquity of joint commitment, where the meaning of joint commitment is expanded and surpasses promises, agreements, and contracts. Although it still retains normative power, it is unclear how this is possible, and where all intersubjective relations are reduced to joint commitment. Okay, at the end, it is the reciprocal response and answered call on behalf of person B, their engagement, to the action of person A that determines whether person A is indeed conducting engaged acts or not. Well, as I said before, Sophie is she's producing engagement acts. If I'm following her. Without my response, no. In that case, this is when Husserl defines social acts, he's trying to, okay, in manuscript, not publicly as Reinach. Reinach thinks that social act is prayer, and prayer is social act. Social act, anyway, because the prayer is addressed to somebody who is not here. Anyway, without answer of that person, this is social act. For Husserl, not. Social act is act if the other decides, if I say to somebody hello, social acts is in the hand of the other. That means if he or she says hello, social act is realized. Some conditions for person B to be moved for me, for example, if Sophie is doing engagement acts, to be moved and potentially join the common action and not be joined to it, that is, that there is no instance that decides, would be that person A publicly and transparently manifests their own goals, that they are of general interest, publicly, general interest, or in the interest of all members of the company or all members of the community, but also of the public at large. And when these acts are conducted jointly, when the reciprocal responses are joint, that means A plus B plus C, etc., there is necessarily a change in the institution, if you want, in the company or in the organization or in the city. Okay, that's it. And thank you.
Thank you very much.